Overvalued markets and volatility. Cybersecurity regulation arrives, but it is a mess. Post-election stress hangover, AI advancements that arrive much sooner than we are preparing for and make humans largely irrelevant, and large language models that can capture the irrational and emotional brain. Five risks we are not thinking enough about, but may be more real than we think. What do they mean for you, and what can you do about that? Listen in to find out.
But first, before we go any further, let's get some housekeeping out of the way. My name is Madhur Duggar. I work in the IT and software M&A space, and this is my podcast series, M&A Insights. If you are interested in having a conversation around the strategic direction of your firm, or looking to grow your book and want some marketing and business development help, or are an investor looking to make an acquisition in the space, write to me at podcastwithmadhur, that's MADHUR, @gmail.com, or reach out to me on LinkedIn.
As we head into 2025, I want to talk about five risks that I feel we as an IT community are not talking enough about and probably should. The first one is a very obvious one. Markets could easily have been overpriced. Over the last year, the S&P has rallied over 20%. The NASDAQ has rallied over 25%. Since 2020, the S&P has rallied 80%. The NASDAQ has rallied 113%. It is clear that markets just can't keep going up like this, and there is no telling when there will be a correction. But it does feel to me a lot of the good news has been priced in. We have avoided a recession. We have started a rate decrease cycle. We have a Republican Senate and House, a Republican president, a conservative Supreme Court, all things that should push towards more business-friendly decisions, but all things that have already occurred. So it feels that all the good news is priced in, and that at this point, if there were some bad news, and then that could create volatility in markets. Volatility in markets has typically not been good for private markets. It tends to slow down the IPO process, which blocks up capital, which then results in slower investments going forward. It also tends to create a wedge between where sellers would like to sell their assets and where buyers would like to buy. And those discussions take longer to happen. Once they even agree, there tends to be longer due diligence processes associated with any particular transaction. So my recommendation on this is, if you know that you are going to exit in 2025, get started and try to get this done before the possibility of markets going down. It's not that they will. I just think that there probably is a higher likelihood of this than there has been in the recent past. Risk two, we get cyber regulation wrong. When the great financial crisis hit and banks were in a huge amount of trouble, one thing that did work was that we had regulatory bodies who had an understanding of how banks work. And the Fed, the FDIC, the OCC were all able to come up with their regulations for how to create more oversight across the banks. And we have the Dodd-Frank Act, which some people might like and others might hate, but the fact is that a unified body of rules came out on the back of that, which helped with regulation and provide clarity on what banks needed to do. Cyber is a different animal. We don't know this risk because it is still evolving. We don't know how to measure it because the data is not fully there. We see already that there is a vast tapestry of regulatory frameworks and guidelines that businesses are supposed to comply with. And I think that that is going to create confusion. And when there is confusion, people tend not to do anything. They tend not to do enough. Government is going to need to be very thoughtful in producing a regulatory framework that is flexible, effective, is implemented swiftly, and at the same time is comprehensive across all the different regulatory needs of all these different bodies. Um, and that requires a government that is very thoughtful and skilled at handling complex projects. The risk here is the government takes the advice of a few people, a few individuals who have vested interests in getting things done a certain way, and we come up with regulation that is insufficient. Um, what are we supposed to do? I think instead of waiting for regulation to come along, we should do the things that make common sense for us to do. Do we have backup and disaster recovery processes in place? Do we have properly secured data? Do we have multi-factor authentication? If we have legacy systems, do we have comprehensive approaches to providing the patches required to transition them over? Those are the simple things that one doesn't need to have to wait for regulation to do, and we should be doing. Risk 3. This is a little more subtle, but I think it's totally relevant. 2024 was a very busy election year. And regardless of how you feel about how the outcome came out, I think it is fair to say most people are very exhausted with everything that happened. The media didn't let us off the hook even for a second. And this feels to me like the end of a big occasion or big party. Some of us are happy and some of us are unhappy, but all of us are going to have to decompress from everything that has happened. This has built stress into our system. We don't acknowledge it because we're just trying to get ahead with our day-to-day life, but that's not how our human bodies work. And so I think that there will be this latent layer of stress amongst people that will gradually have to decompress over time. And we have to be aware of it. We have to know that it exists inside of us. We have to know that it exists inside of the people that we communicate with. And we have to make sure that our communication is taking that into account. I would highly recommend face-to-face interaction as opposed to emails. And if you are to send emails, I would highly recommend that you think about what you're writing, not just what you want to communicate, but what could get interpreted from that sentence. Because I think people will be a little bit on edge. Risk number 4. AI and all of its advancements, even those that are positive, will be here much quicker than we think they will be. Most people, when we talk about AI and talk about when these changes are coming, tend to say, well, it's 2 years out, 3 years out. And frankly, I don't think much thought has gone into where those 2 or 3 years come from. I think the risk is that they might be here in June. Okay. Gemini from Google just announced the Project Astra and the Project Mariner. Both of them are, basically beta models for providing AI agents to do a lot of the work that we are doing ourselves. This is already in beta test. My instinct is that the public is seeing on AI the tip of an iceberg, which means 9/10 of our capabilities around AI already exist, but we don't see them. And I think that it is up to us to realize that that risk actually exists and that we steer our Titanic away from these icebergs. What can we do to do that? This is a time when you have to invest in educating yourself. Educate yourself smartly and swiftly. Find out podcasts that really cover this topic in an intelligent form. You don't have to listen to 10 podcasts on this topic. You have to find the 2 that really work for you and commit to learning them. This is also an opportunity for you to really impress your clients with the information that they need to have. Do you have a thoughtful content piece that gets in front of them on a regular basis? Do you know what their pain points are, and have you educated them yourself about those pain points to the point where you can actually tell them what to do about them? So this is an incredible opportunity as well. The last point I want to say is probably a little bit more subtle, but here it is. Most people agree that AI will eventually be able to do most of the things that the rational brain of a human being is able to process. Now, whether it does it rationally or not doesn't matter. What matters is that it can do it. And most people have said yes, and that's fine, but there is also a part of us that is irrational, that is emotional, which is where all the creativity happens, and AI will never get there. And I think that is a risk, that we should make that assumption. So what is an example of how we might get there? There are social media websites, platforms like Twitter, like Instagram. And we know that there is a lot of content on those websites that is frankly irrational, that is emotional, that is angry, that is not consistent with the information that exists out there. But there is no way to convince these people about the irrationality of their claims. And I think that there is probably somebody out there who is completely up to speed with the fact that this is all irrational information and is probably using AI models and training them on irrational information to try and understand whether that can be captured and modeled. Which means that 4 years down the road, 5 years down the road, and here I again don't know why I'm saying 4 or 5, I really have no idea. It could be next year. We might have a model that does not only rational thinking, but also starts to predict what irrational thought looks like, what creativity looks like. And then we really are standing at the final frontier, which in my opinion has always not been space, but it has always been the irrational part of the human being, which truly, I think, makes us human. The part that we think cannot be modeled. And I think that there is a risk that with all this information that exists out there, which is basically irrational information, that we will start to nibble away at that problem and come up with a model that actually captures our irrational self as well. What can we do about that? We have to be very thoughtful of the content that we are sharing with each other on these platforms. We have to assume that that data is being studied and captured and modeled. And we have to think about our future generations and what is it that they will do to feel worthwhile with themselves. So these are the risks that I think we are not talking enough about, and I think we should be. I hope that you keep them in mind as you head into 2025. Thank you.